So when we think about democracy, I think there's kind of a real interesting opportunity to think about what is participatory democracy in the modern connected world. And I think there's all kinds of versions that are much better than the vote every 2-year kind of version that we have right now. For example, there's a lovely experiment that said, what if people got to vote on where 5% of their income tax goes to? So you would get a list of all the things the government does, right? Which is actually, it's already a good thing because people don't know what the government does. We went, at some point we went to the Chapel Hill Public Library and we asked people, when was the last time you got benefit from taxpayers' money? People couldn't remember when was the last time. And they were in a public library funded by taxpayers' money. So, we don't really understand what the government does, what taxes go for. But if you got a list of all the things the government does and you could decide 5%, you probably don't want people to allocate all of their income tax because there's some things that the government needs to worry about. But doing some kind of marginal contribution and thinking where we want to be, I think would get people to be more involved, care more, look at waste. I think it will make government offices a bit more accountable. So that's one version where I think we could get participatory democracy to be closer to what we want it to be. And another kind of direction is to say, why do we need to vote for one person? Right? So imagine that we would have a voting procedure which would say, you could say, I want Dan Ariely to vote for me on any issues that has to do with education and health, but not about, space exploration and not about nuclear activities. Like imagine all of society as a network of people, and you can assign your vote not just to the representatives, but you could assign your votes to other people in society, where you could say, you know what, Dan, I trust you on those topics. You could vote for me, and I could trust somebody else, and so on. So we could create a network in which we trust different people for different subtopics, and not have this idea that this one person who is representing us is the right person for all topics around. So that's one. The other, of course, big issue. I don't know if you saw this, but we did a lot of studies about how people want society to be designed. So originally we did it on inequality, financial inequality, but then we moved to other areas as well. But in the area of financial inequality, we asked people, first of all, what they understand about the distribution of wealth in the US. So we said, imagine that we took all the people in the US from the poorest to the richest. We broke them into 5 buckets, the 20% richest, 20% less, and the poorest. And we asked you from the 100% wealth, total pie, how much is allocated right now to each of those 5 buckets. And people think that the bottom 2 buckets, the bottom 40% of Americans, own about 9% of the wealth, where in fact they own about 0.3. Right? So this slope is what's called the Gini coefficient, the rate of inequality. People know the rich have a lot. People don't understand. Americans don't understand how much little the poor have. And then we also ask them, what would you like society to be? And we use John Rawls. If you remember, John Rawls had this interesting idea that he said, a just society is a society that if you knew everything about it, you would be willing to join it in a random place. Right? If you're very rich, you might want society that treats the rich nice and the poor not so nice. If you're very poor, you might want the other way around. But if you don't know where you'll be allocated after the fact. You have to consider all perspective. And they call this the veil of ignorance, because you choose before you know where you'll be. So we describe the veil of ignorance to lots of people, and we say, what kind of society would you like to create? And Americans created a society that is more equal than Sweden. Not perfectly equal, nobody wants socialism, but much more equal than Sweden. And not only that, the differences between Republicans and Democrats were tiny. So Republicans wanted slightly more inequality, Democrats wanted slightly more equality, but it was a small difference compared to the gap between what we have and what people want. And that's another way to think about democracy in a modern world. So, you could say that we could vote on a topic, like we could vote on whether we want Obama's healthcare version. That's one approach. But to vote on that as individual, just way too complex. This plan includes so much. We're not going to be experts on it. We don't have the time to really read the 7,000 pages of this plan. What we could do is we could vote on our principles, on how we want society to be, right? Not about the concrete aspects, but on what are the guiding principles of a society. How much we care about equality and how much we care about access to health. And not to vote on something concrete, but to vote on it in terms of what are the principles we believe in. And then it will be the job of the politicians to take our principles and translate them into policies. Think about something like investment. If you go to an investment professional to help you, they don't ask you what stocks you want to invest in. That's their job. What they ask you is, what kind of risk do you want to take? How much money do you want to give to charity? They ask you kind of the general principles about life, and then they go ahead and figure how those principles are going to be played out in the details. And that's another kind of, I think, interesting version to think about politics, which you say, we as citizens will never have the expertise to truly vote on everything, but we understand our own values. And we can say, what kind of society do we want to create? And it will be the job of the politicians to take these values and translate them into specific instances and rules.